Greetings, citizens! You're now trapped in the NerdCage with your hosts Marq and Jay. We hope you have a smashing good time. Yeah.
Hello and welcome. That's right, you're trapped in NerdCage Live. This ain't just a reaction show, but a debate show and a live discussion on everything that makes people like you and I tick. So thank you for joining us tonight. Please hit that like button and subscribe. I'm your co-host, Jay G, come to you live from Syracuse, New York, and always with me, my man, the Fiend from Louisville, the Warrior for Wakanda, Mark Withers. What's shaking, man?
Hey, what's going on, man? Super excited to be here as usual. And yes, tonight's look back is going to focus on the 20th anniversary of M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable. Now, this movie has a special place in my heart because as a comic book fan, as a fan of superheroes, it kind of deconstructs the making of a superhero in a way that if you lived in a world where superheroes existed, but it wasn't such a comic booky kind of world, this is kind of how an origin story would look. Jay, I know that you're not the biggest M. Night Shyamalan fan, but I wanted to kind of see what your thoughts were on this movie.
Okay, again, like you just hit it, that I am not an M. Night Shyamalan fan. I was not a fan of The Sixth Sense, even when that first came out. And we could probably make a whole episode about all the movies he did that I didn't like. But as far as Unbreakable goes, not a bad movie by any stretch. I'm not a huge fan of it, but there are moments. There's some moments I can take that I can appreciate. There's some cinematography moments I can appreciate. And I'm a big Bruce Willis fan, and he knocked it out of the park. You know, he only can do so much what he's got to work with. But here's a fascinating thing for me as I'm sitting here rewatching this film. One of my favorite movies of all time, top 5 movie of all time, is Pulp Fiction.
Right.
And one thing we didn't get in Pulp Fiction, despite that we had Bruce Willis and the great Sam Jackson, is they didn't have any on-screen time together at all.
Right.
Maybe just a brief second at the bar, but they didn't interact. So this was pretty fascinating to watch. We got to finally see the two of them interact, and the chemistry between the two of them, the dynamic, the potential would-be hero and would-be villain is there, and it's awesome. Right. So that's what I love what this movie gave us.
Right. And it's interesting that you sort of bring up, these on-screen scenes between the two of them that we didn't get in Pulp Fiction. Now, if you recall, we actually did get them together in Die Hard with a Vengeance, and they became good friends on the set of that movie, and it was the strength of that friendship that sort of allowed this casting to take place. So there's some interesting details about sort of the making of this movie, right? So right off the heels of The Sixth Sense, or rather during post-production of the Sixth Sense, M. Night Shyamalan started writing the script for this movie, and he specifically wrote it with these two actors in mind. He kind of brought it up to Bruce Willis while they were sort of finishing up that movie, and then the next time that Bruce Willis saw Samuel L. Jackson, he kind of told him like, hey, there's this project that M. Night is doing, that he's going to try to put together. He wants you to play the villain in the movie. And so based off of that camaraderie, they were more than willing to kind of work on it together and start this project together. Another interesting fact is that the character of Audrey, David Dunn's wife, was originally supposed to be played by Julianne Moore, but she dropped out of the project prematurely because there was a scheduling conflict with Hannibal.
Yep.
So she dropped out, and then Robin Wright Penn was cast to take her place.
Oh, wow, man, digging out the facts. And I'm kicking myself in the head right now because I completely forgot about Die Hard 3. I think I'm so focused on Die Hard 1, I forgot about the other ones.
Which is my favorite of the Die Hard movies. Like one day we'll have to go through like a top, top list, basically like an order of the Die Hard movies. But that one is my favorite out of all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now the big twist to me wasn't like the big twist because I feel like the build up, there's a slow burn, but I feel like there was really little payoff with this movie. But some more stuff I can appreciate. The use of color.
Yes.
For example, when we see Sam Jackson's character as a child, he's opened up his gift there, his present.
Right.
It's wrapped in purple, and then he opens it. You see the it's called Active Comics. Obviously, it's a spoof of Action Comics.
Right.
But again, it's the wrapping inside the package is purple, and of course he wears like the purple suit, which you also see in the sequel. But the use of purple on the character, and as well as like when you see the when Bruce Willis's character, David Dunn, when he comes in contact with someone and he sees like the crimes they've committed, there's like a color that they would wear and it would stick out. Like I like the use of like the bright color over the black and white palette there. I just love the use of color in the movie. I think it's done very, very well.
Yes, and interestingly enough, that was an idea that was pitched by Samuel L. Jackson. So, you know, we have these two characters, and he had the idea that the hero should be in all green, and all of his scenes, the surroundings should be green, and that the villain should all be in purple, you know? And the reason why he was thinking that is because if you look at like a color wheel, specifically like a CMYK color wheel, green and purple are diametric opposites. So green is directly across from purple. And you know, if you look really closely, in the very beginning of the film, Bruce Willis is generally in brighter colors, like specifically yellow, like he's dressed in yellow or like a light kind of tan color. The kitchen that he's in one of the scenes is all yellow. Some of the other scenes, everything is like a canary color. Yeah. So as the film progresses, you start to see more and more green be introduced. And green, if you look at like the meanings behind certain colors, green represents security, it represents growth, and it represents strength. So as he starts to develop and realize like what his abilities are and his capabilities, and he becomes more confident, you see more and more green come out until at the very end, you see him in all green. So as for Samuel L. Jackson's character, Elijah Price, him being in all purple, purple is sort of the color of nobility, of eccentricity, of ambition. And all of those attributes you can sort of put on Elijah Price, on Mr. Glass. And so, you know, when you kind of put those things together, it kind of makes for this interesting color palette. Now, especially with the villains, like whenever he like kind of like puts his hands out and kind of gets the intuition, he can kind of see all of those images. The character, like the person who's committing the crime, is either in orange or in red, and that is to sort of separate them from the regular muted colors throughout the rest of the film. So it was an interesting thing that Samuel L. Jackson pitched to M. Night that he thought was a good enough idea, and it wound up being one of the most powerful points in the movie.
And one more thing about the color purple, and that I don't think that they were going for in this movie, but I couldn't help but think the color purple means death in Japan.
So yeah, you have all of these hidden meanings that maybe you didn't catch on the first go around, but then, you know, the more often you watch it, or, you know, when you sit down to kind of analyze the film, you can kind of see these colors being used to kind of tell their own story behind the actual story.
And another thing I can appreciate, and this is why I'm so thankful I'm doing this channel with you, because when we did our Superman 2 look back a while ago, you brought up the whole George Reeves at the birthday party and the kid and the gun.
Right.
And we get that scene in this movie, in the kitchen. And Bruce Willis even said, listen, if you shoot me, the bullet's going to bounce. And I'm just like, wow. It didn't dawn on me seeing this movie 20 years ago, rewatching it. And I'm so glad it was good timing, because we just rewatched Superman 2, and it all comes together. It all came together. I'm like, wow. So what are your thoughts on that scene?
So I had the immediate, you know, that was my immediate reaction as well. Like when I first watched it, I didn't pick up on that because I didn't really know that story. But then watching it again, last night, I kind of remembered that, I was like, oh, wow, they actually took this element, which is a part of real life, and like actually put that into the movie, which I thought was brilliant, And so yeah, I mean, it's just little touches like that I think make this movie really special.
Yeah, absolutely. And also another thing we have to talk about too. I mean, this movie was already being in production long before. I mean, I know X-Men came out first, but this movie was already in production and being filmed before X-Men even came out. So This was like a superhero movie that was being made before the whole big superhero movement.
Right. And the interesting thing about it, I mean, it only kind of post-dates X-Men by like a few months, right?
Yeah.
So it was actually being developed as part of a first look deal for Disney. And Disney being not really in the superhero business at the time because they hadn't purchased Marvel, there was no MCU, the idea of making a quote unquote superhero movie was kind of poisonous at the time because of movies like Batman and Robin failing and things like that. So their idea, they were interested in the idea, but they wanted it to sort of be restructured as a thriller, like as sort of like a psychological thriller. And the original story for it was supposed to be 3 parts. So it was supposed to be, David Dunn's origin, and then you were supposed to have a supervillain's origin, and then you have the big climactic ending, like you have this sort of big battle at the end, which is typical of most comic book movies. But they decided to sort of retool it and make it more of an origin story for David Dunn, and to try to kind of break it apart and on the one hand make it as realistic as possible and give it as much verisimilitude as possible, but on the other hand sort of deconstruct the whole comic book genre and kind of look at each archetype and kind of define each archetype within the story. And I don't think that had ever been done before. And I think that the reason why that's important is because it influenced other films, other comic book movies coming forward, going forward. And I think that you wouldn't have a Batman Begins, or you wouldn't have like some of the other films like in the MCU with stories written the way they were without this movie being written the way that it was.
I'm glad you just mentioned that, because one of the this is not a knock on the MCU, but the most of the main tropes in the MCU movies is you got the superhero origin, and then the villain was the exact opposite.
Yes.
So basically in the first Iron Man, you had, there was Tony Stark, and then of course Big Lebowski there with his Jeff Bridges
Right.
with his mechanized suit, but he was the evil version. We get these polar opposites in like every single MCU movie. But this movie, they dove in on it. Like Sam Jackson says, we are opposites on the same curve,
right,
on opposite ends. So like they dwell on that. So yeah, you're right. So I feel like every superhero movie that came after, copied and pasted that, but put it in their own way. And one more thing I want to appreciate about the movie too is the very, very beginning where he's on the train, he takes the wedding ring off, and he starts hitting on that sports agent gal, and then he said out loud, but he's in a flirtatious manner saying yeah, I'd like to be a power swimmer or whatever like that, but then he said, I'm afraid of water though, is that going to be a problem? And then come to find out, he was actually afraid of water, and he even said, I found what your kryptonite is, water, and so on and so forth. So I thought that was a clever touch. If you didn't, I know it wasn't really, it was kind of glossed over, but when you rewatch the film, you're like, oh, okay, I see you were going there.
Right. I mean, there's lots of little interesting little touches that kind of make the movie pop in that way. I wanted to kind of touch on, speaking of that, I kind of wanted to touch on like a small piece of the movie, which is the orange suit man. So for anybody who hasn't seen it, or maybe it was a long time since you saw it, there's a character towards the end of the movie that is basically a serial killer that David Dunn goes in to sort of defeat, to sort of save some people. That character was originally supposed to be the Horde. So the Horde is James McAvoy's character from Split and from Glass. The original idea was that you'd have David Dunn's origin in the first act, and somewhere within the second or the third act, you'd be introduced to the Horde, and the Horde would actually fight David Dunn, and these children would be at stake. Yeah. So somewhere along the way, they decided that it would be a little too messy to try to like bring in the Horde's origin in the same movie. And so they just simplified that character.
No, I never would have known that.
Yeah. Another fact about that is that the scene in the train station where David Dunn is actually like putting his hands out and kind of like letting people touch him, and he's kind of getting these flashes, and you see a mother and her young son, and you see the son being abused by the mother and stuff like that. There's just like a quick flash of that. So there was a fan theory that came out around the time of Split. They basically the fan theory was that was a young Kevin, that was a young version of that of the Horde.
Okay, I could see that.
Yeah, and when Glass came out, M. Night Shyamalan confirmed that was the intended case, that he was supposed to be the Horde as a child.
Okay. So since you brought it up, I feel like we couldn't do this look back without talking about the two movies that eventually followed. So the first one being Split. Now, again, I enjoyed Split because I felt like Split was kind of the movie that quote unquote saved M. Night Shyamalan's career, because after Signs, it was like a free fall of bad movies. Like I wasn't a fan of him to begin with, but then it was just getting to the point where like he was just making an ass of himself with every movie he put out.
Yeah.
Then here comes Split. And then of course I didn't know going in that, obviously spoiler, at the very end of Split, you find out it's in the same cinematic universe as Unbreakable, and you see David Dunn at the very end of the movie. So yeah, like I said, I enjoyed Split a lot more than his other movies. I don't think it's as good as Unbreakable, but I will say this though, in a nutshell, Split's just entertaining because it's I would call it like an acting reel for James McAvoy is what that movie pretty much is.
Yeah, pretty much. This is the movie that James McAvoy really gets to sort of spread his wings and kind of like show his range and like what he can really do. And there's no other movie that he's done where you really get to see him play such extreme roles and play them with such ease and such power, And you're right. I think that, if he were to do just one movie and then like people ask like, well, how good is this guy? You just kind of just put this one movie on and it kind of just shows all these different roles that he gets to play, and very convincingly. And so,
absolutely.
He's kind of a one-man show in that, despite the fact
it's entertaining. It's pretty, it's kind of, it's funny, but it's not, because it's, what his character's doing. He's doing horrific things, but then he's got his other personalities that come out there, that are amusing.
Right.
But like I don't really need that movie to say like I know how good the guy is, but if you really want to see it on full display, like you said, it's that one.
Right.
But this is here's the thing though, going into what was going to be the third movie, Glass. Now after watching the end of Split, I was pumped. And I walked out of the theater saying, oh my God, we're going to get another Unbreakable movie.
Right.
And shortly after the official announcement came out, the third movie's coming out, Glass. And then I remember seeing the first trailer for Glass. I remember how hyped I was. And I'm sorry, I saw Glass and I hated it. I was so let down. Everything was there to make this to be the grand finale. I loved how they made David Dunn a vigilante working with his son. It was beautiful, but but the rest of the movie didn't work. I was looking forward to the clash, and it just didn't work for me. I hated Glass with a passion. I'm sorry. Yeah. So now M. Night Shyamalan's back on the shit list as far as I'm concerned.
Now, I actually liked Glass quite a bit.
Wow.
It definitely had its problems, but I thought that it was an apt sequel. in the sense that, here you have in the very beginning, in the very first act, you have David Dunn kind of fulfilling his destiny as a crime fighter, as a full-blown superhero. His son, who's now an adult, is actually helping him with it, which, he's the one person that actually like believed in him from the very beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
All of that made perfect sense. Once they're sort of captured and, David Dunn's kind of put in this asylum with Mr. Glass and with the Horde, that, here you have this psychiatrist that comes along with these very reasonable explanations as to why he can do what he does, why the Horde can do what he does, and all of this makes sense. It was really, for me, where it fell apart was the third act. It just didn't really come together the way that it should. And, I won't give any spoilers as far as like the very end.
Because it's still relatively new.
It's still a relatively new film. But I just didn't really think that the purpose of what they did at the very end like really helped to move anything forward. Like it didn't really it didn't really pack the punch that it needed to for like the end of a trilogy. It didn't really resolve anything the way that it should. And so like, I still enjoyed it, but it wasn't as good as I expected it to be, and I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, and truth be told, despite as much as I disliked the third movie, I wouldn't rule out seeing another movie with David Dunn. That's just I like the character enough to like, all right, if they give him another chance in a better sequel, I'm all for it.
Right.
But as like I said, but the end of the trilogy was just an absolute letdown because, like I said, Unbreakable, had its. I'm not a huge fan, but had its moments. Split was entertaining, and then just the third movie was about. It's the part 3 curse. It's so hard. It's sometimes the part 3 curses. It's inevitable.
Yeah, it's a shame that they didn't really. I mean, I'm just speculating, of course, but it seems to me like they had probably a pretty solid handle on this sort of 3-part arc that they were originally like thinking about, and for whatever reason, they probably made changes along the way and didn't stick to that original formula. And I think that if they had, we probably would have gotten a much stronger trilogy.
Yeah.
Also, they waited too long, in my opinion. They waited way too long between Unbreakable and Split.
And that's just it, because he kept doing these other movies and they were all so bad. I mean, they probably should have followed up Unbreakable a little bit sooner. And maybe but again, to be fair, I'm actually happy for M. Night Shyamalan to find, that he found his footing back for a moment when Split first came out, because like I said, he was hitting a hard downslope, between The Village, The Happening, The Last Airbender. Like he was on a free fall, and it was getting bad. Like I said, Split like saved his career, and then Glass comes out, and it's just like, ugh. So maybe, just maybe, whatever he has planned next, maybe he can redeem himself once more. We'll have to wait.
Yeah, we'll have to see. We'll have to just wait and see.
So my closing thoughts on Unbreakable, again, coming from a man that's not an M. Night Shyamalan fan, the movie is all right. I'm not gonna bash it, but like I just said before, there's stuff that I could take away that I can appreciate.
Right.
And that's what I'll give is I feel like there's a lot there to appreciate, and that I feel like it's been an influential film because of it.
Right. Okay, and that's a fair point. My assessment is that while it's not a perfect film, and while some parts of it don't age as well as you would probably expect, it is without a doubt one of the most important films to the comic book genre. Yeah. In the sense that it really changed the game. It changed how everybody sort of looks at comic books and looks at the way a comic book film should be written. I think that it very deeply influenced everything that came after it, and the potential for this story to continue and to actually be told in a new and exciting and more powerful way is still there. And I hope we do see more from the David Dunn character in the future.
Absolutely. So at the time of this recording, we just want to let everybody know that our last live stream with Joey Z of Live at Agony was an absolute blast. I'm still smiling ear to ear over it. Thank you to everyone who came. For those who didn't make it, please go back and watch that stream. And also, there's also a small clip of a really terrific Ozzy story. And Joey, shared, not only he shared about what's going on with the band and his musical side, but we got to talk a lot about, Godzilla and The Shining and other stuff like that, other nerd stuff that he was into. It was just an absolute joy. And Mark, I'm so glad we did that.
It was an absolute blast to have Joey Z there with us. Thanks to everybody that showed up for that stream. And, he has said sort of off camera that he is more than willing to come back and kind of spend some more time with us. And so we'll be doing that sometime in 2021. So please be on the lookout for that.
Yes, and we just wanted to share with you real quick is speaking of Bruce Willis, we are going to be debating, is Die Hard a Christmas movie on December 3rd? And then we're going to finish out the year with two great guests. We're going to have Titan Goji, very well-known kaiju YouTuber. He's got over 10,000 subscribers, coming to debate us what the best Christmas movie of all time is. And obviously we're going to talk, more kaiju stuff as well. And then we're going to end the year strong with Scorpion's Revenge Watch Party with Master Daniel Pacino, who's agreed to come back. So we're going to end 2020 strong. And of course, be on the lookout for more lookbacks this year. And we're going to come out stronger than ever in 2021. So thank you to everyone who's been on this ride with us.
As far as 2020 being, as bad as it was, you guys have really stepped up and sort of made this a positive thing for us and sort of helped this channel to grow. And so we appreciate you. We really hope that you stick around. We're only going to get better at this. So, again, much thanks.
Absolutely. So before we go, we ask you to pretty please like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell, and spread this shit like Sofa Soda USA from Louisville to Syracuse, and to all of our friends and fans around the world at NerdCage Live. Enjoy life, stay safe, and good night.
Sayonara.
Ooh, trying to get out of the NerdCage, are ya? Well, before you go, hit that subscribe button. And if you're really intrigued, ring that bell. Thank you for dropping by. Until next time, tell everyone you know about NerdCage Live!